Content note about this episode. There is discussion of racism, police brutality, and the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. It's mid-August, and in the middle of a continuing pandemic, I sit down with my good friend James Proby to discuss the fact that there are social justice protests happening all across the country. We should be at home, safe, and social distance from other members of the community, but many of us are marching in the streets to protest police brutality and blatant racism that was openly supported by organizations that were openly supported by the man who was president at the time. The conversation was deep and in-depth, and it may be upsetting to some listeners, but it's a conversation that continues to need to be had. Before we dive in, let me thank you for listening to Laundry and Other Mysteries, the podcast where we discuss how our guests do their laundry, what their life is like between loads, while offering tips for solving some common and uncommon laundry mysteries to our listeners. I'm your host, Desiree Hickson, also known as the Laundry Diva. Thank you for tuning in to Laundry and Other Mysteries. I am Desiree Hickson, also known as the Laundry Diva, and today my guest is James Proby, the founder, of the Men's Xchange. Why don't you introduce yourself, James, and tell us all about what you're working on?
So yes, I am James Proby, and the founder of the Men's Xchange is an accurate description. My title is actually founder and chief ethos officer, but I'm the founder of the Men's Xchange. And the Men's Xchange, for those of you who do not know, is a social impact business. Those of you who are not familiar with social enterprise or social impact businesses, those are businesses that are set to make money, but they utilize the money that they make to help solve some social issues and do good in the world. So we take in men's business and dress apparel, so only suits, sport jackets, dress shirts, slacks, ties on donation. They get donated to us. We send everything out to dry cleaning and laundry. Once it's been cleaned and laundered, it comes back into the shop. Anybody in the whole wide world can shop there, and everything is $40 or less. So we do a full suit for $40. We do a sport jacket for $30. We do dress pants and dress shirts for $10 a piece. And we do full sizings and fittings with every single person that comes through, so that we can let you know what sizes you are. We write that down. We give it back to you. And we'll talk to you about how things are supposed to fit on you, how a suit jacket's supposed to fit at the shoulders, chest, and sleeve length, and how pants are supposed to fit in the waist, in the seat, in the pant length. And for about every 9 or so people that shop with us, we're able to dress one person in our community at no cost. And those individuals get referred to us through our nonprofit partners, like the Pikes Peak Workforce Center and Mount Carmel Center for Veterans and Reach Pikes Peak and the Colorado Springs Conservatory and One Nation Walking Together and Inside Out Youth Services. We add 1 to 4 new nonprofits every quarter so that we can manage that growth, but our goal is to help individuals who are changing their lives to make sure that we remove the barrier of clothing to them getting to their next level.
That's amazing. And of course, you inspired me as far as I kind of always have been working with the idea of doing laundry for the people who are unhoused or who have financial challenges. But the idea of raising money to build a truck and have a truck go around the neighborhood, the community, and help people was kind of inspired by the Men's Xchange idea that we can help everyone and also focus on helping people who are in more needs than average.
Right.
And I love that idea. But, but before we get too serious today, I got to ask you one question, and it'll probably lead to the second one. But the first question is not actually a laundry question.
Mm-hmm.
It is a fashion question.
Okay.
Because I rarely get to discuss this topic with men, it's a pet peeve of mine, but I'm wondering, black socks or white?
So The actual statement is that you should wear your pant color denotes the color of your socks.
Okay.
So traditionally speaking, if I were wearing gray pants, I would wear a gray sock. If I were wearing black pants, I would wear a black sock. It is supposed to look like a covering of your body that extends down so that you just have it so that even while you cross your legs or you sit down, it covers your ankles so that your flesh looks like the same. I mean, that your pant leg looks like the same as your ankle leg as we're covering up that flesh. In recent years, we've gotten guys to get a lot more stylish and a lot more swagger, and they up their sock game. And then you're wearing a sock that doesn't match anything in your outfit, but it is something that has a lot of color and a lot of boldness. It is not solid black and it's not solid white and it's not a solid color. It's generally something that I've got some Sesame Street socks that I absolutely love. It's something, right? It's something that just gives you, it allows you to make some fairly bold statements.
Right. And it can just bring you joy.
Yes.
It's like, I'm wearing my Batman socks.
I'm wearing my Batman socks. Absolutely.
I think that's wonderful. Okay, so then the second question leads into the laundry question, which is, do you fold or ball your socks?
Ooh, that is a great question. I am not committed to either one. I've got balled socks. I've got socks that are not, I don't have folded.
Okay.
My socks are not folded. My socks are either balled or tied. Oftentimes I'll just tie a little knot in them, so in the center of them they're kind of knotted together, and then that way the elastic at the top stays spongy and snappable and comes back and forth versus when you ball them up, oftentimes they don't get to be that way.
Yep, that is true. That's why I ask. I actually used to have a client who would tie his 20 pairs of socks together, and whenever I would launder them, then I'd have to untie them so that they would dry properly.
Yeah, I'm that guy. Yeah.
That wasn't the most fun, but at least I knew at the end of every laundry trip we would have matching socks. That was the only saving grace for that.
Exactly. I'm 100% sure that somewhere between the washing machine and the dryer, it eats one sock every single time.
Yes,
so.
and the truth is that is a known fact, and that's only because of how when the water flushes out of the washing machine, it's going so fast that anything that's lightweight in your washer is going to go with it. That's where all your socks go. Look at
all
the
my
back
socks
of your
left
washer.
like that. Yeah.
Or the sewer drain, wherever the washer flows to. That's where all the lonely socks are now.
Right.
When I found that out, I was like, oh, duh. Of course that's where the socks went. That's their escape hatch, the washing machine.
Right.
But yeah, if you tie them up, I mean, it's a good suggestion in general, but it only really works for long socks, right, is if you tie them in the middle, wash them, it'll prevent the elastic that goes around usually your calf from stretching too far. It'll keep them together in the wash. You just have to untie them when you throw them in the dryer, and then you'll have matching socks when you're done. Another recommendation is using safety pins. So if you're like me and you really want to make sure your socks come out matching when you're done with the laundry, put safety pins, and that way you also don't have to untie them when you move them from the washer to the dryer. But I always recommend to never ball your socks in any way for the simple fact because the elastic will loosen the tightness, and then the socks wear out a lot quicker. So I recommend just either folding them in half or, if you've got the safety pin attached to them, just kind of throw them in a drawer. And, if you grab one, you're going to grab the other. So
good call.
They're always matching. All right. So let's get into today's topic. Today we're going to talk about allyship and how you can relate it to Black Lives Matter or other social justice, what do we want to say, groups, like the LGBTQ or any other association. Because sometimes I feel like people, particularly if you're talking about a organization that supports Black people, white allies might feel kind of left out, like, where do I stand? How can I help? And so we want to talk and maybe give some tips or some suggestions on how you can help the community that doesn't necessarily involve you kind of like, joining it or taking over it or anything like that, how you can support all the things that are happening in your community to help uplift the community as a whole.
Yeah, so that is a large-ranging topic and a hot one. So I'm so glad you decided to ask that today, or that we can talk about that today. I think the most important thing is, if you're going to be an ally to any community, that you are not a primary member of. Suggesting that if you are straight and you are a cis hetero, whatever we want to define that in, but you also are very much so interested in supporting and allying with the LGBTQ plus community. It is making sure that you are walking in not as a savior and suggesting I have the answers and I know how to fix society's ills on this, but to recognize the fact that you have not personally experienced the same things that your brothers and sisters are going through in that space, so that you get to listen to them and to their experiences and their perspective, but also because you get an opportunity to be part of what we would consider the normative society, or the non-deviant society in that case, that your voice can carry so much more weight when we talk about creating social justice and we're creating equality. There hasn't been a shortage of black people talking about inequality since the 1500s. I'm sorry, since black people first showed up in St. Augustine, Florida, as slaves. There hasn't been a shortage of individuals saying that. The shortages come from the majority of the population not listening, not acknowledging, not willing to do anything about it, because either the system of oppression or injustice served them, or they have been blinded and ignorant to it. And we're experiencing right now a time of social awakening that has yet to have been seen in this country. And this can truly be a pivot point in American history where we start to figure out how we can be more inclusive and acknowledge individuals of different backgrounds, heritage, religion, and sexual identity, and how we can wrap our arms around individuals and help to create equal starting lines. Now, no one is talking about creating equal outcomes for everyone.
Right, because
we're not talking about
guaranteed or possible.
Right, we're not talking about a communistic system where everybody gets the same 3 pennies. Right. We are talking about how do we create opportunities for individuals to not be impeded or have barriers as they would like to start businesses, or if they just want to walk down the street holding hands, or if they do not want to feel oppression in their job, at their home, in renting and purchasing. All those things are very real problems that exist in the United States, and how can we fix those? So the big space is, first off, acknowledging a problem exists. And in acknowledging that problem exists to that group as well as to the majority group. So when we talk about, as I'm talking about standard versus deviant, it's a really important place to realize that America is based upon the standard deviant mindset. If you are white, that is the norm or the standard. If you are non-white, you're deviant. That is abnormal. That's the deviant space. If you are straight, you're the norm or the standard. If you are not straight, you're the deviant. You know, if you are male, you are the standard. If you are not male, you're the deviant. So if we can acknowledge those things as being the places that society, and it specifically our society, has been set up, then we can start to acknowledge, hey, look, I realize that a lot of rules have been put in place to take care of me as a man. Mm-hmm. And I do not know what it's like to feel the scared insecurity spaces of a woman, right? And I need to figure out how I can understand that. So I can say, I don't know what that's like, and I'm going to listen to you as you share your perspective with me. I'm not going to push back on any of those things. I may try to ask for more information or ask you to better define something for me, and I may tell you that that's not the way that I've seen it. But thank you for sharing your perspective. That's the first thing. So that we're not negating voices that are doing their best to try to share with you a perspective that is different than your own.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second space in there is following that exact same space up with, I want you to understand that even if I understand that I don't know, and I'm trying to learn and be an ally, because injustice and inequality is something I don't want to stand for.
Right.
That's a pretty straightforward kind of two-sentence conversation that will allow yourself to be aligned with whatever minority group we're talking about. And again, by minority, I do mean non-majority group,
right,
so that we can make those changes. The reality is that African Americans have never made up more than 20% of the population in the United States of America, right? While women have made up 50% of the population at different points throughout time and history, they've also not been unified enough to be able to step forward and do anything, or to push, I shouldn't say do anything, to push the agenda to change it, because there has been enough voices of dissent that would not allow that to happen. Most minority groups are true. They do not make up the majority, so they cannot change things radically enough to have as strong an impact to create equality or some semblance of equality. And it is necessary and incumbent upon the dominant group, the non-deviant group, the standard group, the majority group, whatever you want to label that, to acknowledge the fact that inequalities exist and then do something about it. Help create an equal starting line. And I really think that that's kind of the spaces where we can have the largest impact and do the most amount of good.
Yeah, I like that idea. Now, there's a couple things that I see that can kind of hinder people wanting to come on board as allies, and I wonder if you could address that a little bit. Sometimes people from the deviant group have a tendency to be standoffish to those. And is there a suggestion that you would offer to those people in that group to say there's a better way to welcome allies versus Google it? Or, one thing I see a lot because I'm on social media is, somebody comes across and they appear to me to be innocent, asking, what can I do? How should I do it? And the person they're addressing has, they're very aggressive in responding, just Google it. I'm not here to teach you how to be a better ally or whatever.
Right.
What do you suggest in that?
I would suggest that, and let me be clear in this. I come from generations of individuals who have fought for equality and done so in a very public space, and have made some pretty big strides in helping our society get further down this road. So when I say I was born into this, I don't mean this just from an anecdotal space. I mean it from a very legitimate space, that this is something that my family has engaged in a long period of time. The reality is that for hundreds of years, we simply wanted someone to listen to us and to acknowledge the problems that exist. Mm-hmm. It seems almost flippant or irresponsible to have individuals listening now and then say, well, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to share it now. Right. The reality is that it is exhausting, and it is on one hand not the people of color or the people that have the deviant group. It is not their responsibility to educate you on all the misguided things that have happened. That's a very true statement. I get that. But the reality is also, if you're not sharing your perspective and your point of view and your experiences, then how is this dominant group that is doing their best to try to understand for the first time in history, how are they supposed to accurately understand this and learn this from a first person perspective or second person perspective? Mm-hmm. One of the best things in the universe that I've learned is that it is hard to hate up close. It's easy to misunderstand something when you're reading an article that has been framed by someone else's lens. Mm-hmm. But when you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with someone, and the human aspect of being close with someone and understanding what they're saying, what they're doing, is incredibly real. I've got people who are keyboard warriors who will say some of the most offensive and horrific things online, mm-hmm. who would never once dare to say that face to face with me or nose to nose with me. Right. That's just not something they would do. So we've been given a great deal of freedom when we start talking about social media and keyboards and and communicating in that sense. But the best thing to do is to sit down and have those conversations. And it's challenging for those individuals who are minorities, who belong to those minority groups. But it's been my experience, and I can only speak for myself. I would not dare to speak for all Black people in this space. It's been my experience that there are individuals that I'm willing to pour and share my energy with. Mm-hmm. And let's be clear, we are talking about energy. We are talking about how can I share my energy and my love and my experiences with individuals. I've come to the understanding that there are certain individuals who do not get it. They're not going to get it. They cannot hear my voice. Mm-hmm. I am not the teacher or the friend or the ally that they want to listen to. Mm-hmm. And so I've learned to stop wasting my words on those people. Right. I just exclude them from my life. I will stop talking to them. I will unfriend them. I will move on to a different space. Right. And I want to do that with as little animosity as possible. But for those individuals who actually hear my voice and can actually pay attention and listen and empathize and sympathize and ask pertinent questions without pushing back and without defending an unjust system, those are people I want to pour energy into. I really do believe that the vast majority, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this, I think the vast majority of people that we're dealing with nowadays are not maliciously racist. Mm-hmm. I think they are passively ignorant. Right. And there's a massive difference between those two. They have no understanding of American history, of what's happened to this space. They only have one perspective, and that's the perspective that they've had their entire lives. Right. Trying to educate those people or getting them to a place where they can understand that there's a different side to the same coin that they never experienced is a great space when people actually want to turn that quarter over. But when individuals refuse to turn that quarter over, it is a waste of time to continue to try to express it to them because they're not going to look at it. Right. One of my mother's favorite statements is, there are none so blind as those who will not see. Mm-hmm. Not those who cannot see, but those who will not see, those who choose not to see. And there are individuals who are so deeply ingrained in protecting the system that currently exists that they will not see that there's something else that's gone on there. Right. They're actively and ardently going to defend the current system the way that it is, that they will not see other things have happened and other people have had different experiences, and that the system is designed to put certain people in first place and certain people in second place. Mm-hmm. That the United States of America is designed, unfortunately, to help create a caste system. Now, we like to think that individuals can rise as high as they can based upon effort, time, talent, education. But when we start creating more barriers for individuals, we are creating higher, steeper roads for individuals to hike those mountains. And that's hard enough the way that it is without additional barriers being put into place. Right. I think once individuals of color or minority groups, depending on what group we're talking about, can share their experiences, and it's a draining process, but can share those experiences with people who are listening and open to change, then we have something that becomes really powerful.
Right. And it kind of feels like we're there. I mean, we're, with all of the protests that are happening, still happening in Portland and in little smaller pockets around the country, people are still standing up and going, Black Lives Matter or whatever the protest is of the week. But they're still, it's kind of because of COVID as a pandemic and some people being out of work and the unfortunately high number of unemployments. But people are like, well, I don't have anything else to do. so I'm going to.
That's very much so a perfect storm. You're absolutely right. The reason that this whole thing happened to come together all at once is the fact that we had a pandemic and that the world, not the country, but the world was told to stay at home for a while, mm-hmm. right? And in that same time frame that all of this happened, sports got canceled, right? We're at a space where most television shows were on a break, so there were no filming of new TV shows. Mm-hmm. So you could binge watch things that were on streaming services, but there was not new news coming out in the universe. There was not new sports to distract us. You couldn't go to the movies. You can't go to concerts. All those things came into place at one time. And then at that exact same moment, we all got to watch a man get executed in front of us for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah.
We all got an undeniable glimpse into what our criminal justice system looks like, and it could not have been illustrated more cleanly than someone kneeling on another human being's neck as he's begging for breath and his family and help and God, and the rest of society feeling as though they're powerless to do anything about it, while the individual that is kneeling on his neck does so with such regard and such disregard as to suggest, I understand I can do this without being impugned ever. It's watching all of that play out in front of your eyes and having someone else not be able to tell you the narrative of what's going on there. And they try, and they continue to try to suggest, oh, it was a drug overdose, or he was on drugs, or he had a criminal history, or we can run down that whole list of things.
Right.
I know what my eyes showed me for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah.
As does what everyone else. So everyone had an opportunity to see this and to understand that there were 1,000 points when that whole situation could have gone differently. And our country and our world would be in a different space because of that. When you say it feels like that right now, it does feel like we have a bit of momentum having these conversations right now and being able to discuss these. But I am of the age that, I remember the LA riots. Right? And when I say I remember them, I mean I was in my 20s. It wasn't like I was a child in that space. I was an adult. So the whole thing that went on with Rodney King was not just the outrage that Rodney King got beaten by LAPD to within an inch of his life. There was an outrage there. But that was not the thing that sparked the riots. What sparked the riots was the acquittal. Right. That every single one of those officers got off without any justice being served. Right? Yep. The issue is not just that Floyd was murdered, that George Floyd was murdered. And we need to continue to use the words that need to happen in there. This is not an unfortunate incident. This is murder.
Right.
Breonna Taylor was murdered. Right? Simply because their murderers happen to have on badges does not mean that they should be absolved from these crimes. And all too often they are. Right? And that's not to suggest that all cops are bad cops. But it does mean that all cops get to be bad cops when they refuse to police everyone the same way. Our criminal justice system is broken when it doesn't police individuals the same way. And that same way means by the color of their skin or the badge that they're wearing. Okay? So, yes, everybody gets to be lumped together. If you're all going to side this one way and not do something about it, then all cops get to be painted with this bad brush, which is completely untrue and unfair. But that's what happens in that space. The point is that we cannot lose the momentum that we've got here, and we cannot lose it and it should not be centered around violence. An eye for an eye leaves the world blind. And only love can drive away hate in the spaces, right? Only light can clear out darkness. So what we have to do is to figure out how do we shine light on all of these situations. How do we continue to empower individuals to learn more and experience life and see it through a different lens than what they've seen? Because having 20% of the population screaming about this has done no good for centuries, right? If that pendulum gets to swing and it is no longer 20% of African American populations and 4% of allies, and it turns into a space where it's 20% of an African American population, and it's 40% of allies, right? Now we're looking at a 60% swing, and now something can be done. We can acknowledge that this is unacceptable behavior, and we will not tolerate it as a society ever again. One of the most important things about British imperialism or or German fascism, right, is the education that each one of those countries provides at an elementary level to suggest their own shame in what they've done. In British colonialism, if you had a chance to watch the British teach themselves about what they've done, they will point out this was an embarrassment and a stain on our history. We did this as a nation, we backed it as a nation, and it's shameful and we should never do it again.
Right.
And by teaching the young the reality of the ills of their own society, they ensure that what they've done has been morally changed. In Germany, it's not, you just don't wash over the fact that the Third Reich existed, or that Nazis existed, or fascism existed. You dive into it, you lean into it and say, we did this, and it was horrible. And we subjected people to the most horrific things that any human being has done to another human being. And it's unacceptable, and we won't accept it ever again.
Right.
We as Americans refuse to do that.
Yeah. From what I am familiar with in Germany, it's part of the course that teaching about the uprising and the downfall of the Third Reich and everything that the people could have done or should have done is part of their curriculum. It's not ignored. But here you hear politicians almost daily going, oh, slavery, if the slaves were happy to be, to have a roof over their head, and they were proud to be enslaved. At least they were well taken care of or whatever, not acknowledging that they were beaten, not acknowledging that they were raped, and not acknowledging that they were ripped from their homelands and so on, and just kind of, being flippant about it and going, gosh, you black folks today just are so ungrateful for what we did for your ancestors, 300 and so on years ago. And you're kind of like, okay. And then they go, well, me and my family, we've managed to overcome, when my Italian father came here with, just 50 cents in his pocket and look how successful we've been. And then you're like, even though we know that race is a construct and it's designed by the people in power, it still exists. And even if my technical descendants were Italian, because I have brown skin, I will not get the benefit
100% true.
Being able to pass as white and also pass money to my descendants and so on.
Absolutely.
And it's just so frustrating when you try to explain that to people. But when you do, and people go, oh, you know what, when you compare the actual apples versus apples and oranges, where people try to make excuses. Well, my ancestors didn't do that to you. But then you think of companies like GE or some, companies that have been around for like a couple hundred years that benefited from their inception from slavery, colleges that benefited from slavery like Princeton and Yale, and then go, well, if it wasn't for the work of the slaves that built those foundations, that did the gardening on those properties and so forth, those colleges wouldn't have been able to get the uplift that made them the successful Ivy Leagues and so forth. So they owe their existence. They owe their current power to to holding down brown skinned people. And so the idea, we're not even necessarily, there are people out there talking about reparations, and bringing, evening out the playing field, so to speak. But there are some people that just want the acknowledgement. We don't even necessarily want you to feel guilty, but we want you to acknowledge that this thing has happened. And in some cases, in some areas, it is happening. I was surprised when I read a couple of years ago that in some parts of Texas, and Texas was where Juneteenth was born, because it was where slaves finally learned that, they had been emancipated. Even clear into the 60s and 70s, there were still people who were slaves.
Yeah, so there's so much stuff that's out there. I'm currently in the process of reading an incredible book by Isabel Wilkerson called The Great Migration. So, long book, absolutely amazing from a Pulitzer Prize winning author.
Mm-hmm.
And she writes in this, the way she writes and the phraseology and the terms she uses makes it read like it's a novel, like
mm-hmm.
it's a fiction novel. It's absolutely amazing. But it is a story of nonfiction of 4 individuals as they mimic the movements of the Great Migration. One of the things that we don't talk about in this country is the fact that there is a Great Migration that happened from as early as 1860 at the end of the Civil War. But if we batten it back down to 1900 to 1970,
mm-hmm.
it is the exodus of individuals leaving, quote unquote, the old country of the South
mm-hmm.
and immigrating to the new country of the North
right.
and the West, right? And it's easy to see that the populations of Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, New York City, Philadelphia were all ridiculously impacted by slaves, former slaves, and sharecroppers leaving the Jim Crow South and going north. Mm-hmm. There's so much that has happened in there, and we talk about the indentations that individuals have to deal with every single day as to why they chose to leave everything that they knew to try and find something better based upon the hopes that life would be better is absolutely amazing. It's pretty incredible. But again, those are things that are not taught in school, right? We don't talk about them. We don't acknowledge them. We don't get into all of that space because we don't want to talk about, as a nation, it is an easier narrative for us to suggest that America has become one of the greatest countries in the world and a superpower in less than 300 years because of innovation, because of determination and grit and stick-to-itiveness. That's the narrative we like.
Right.
The narrative we don't like is that we came to a country, we committed genocide, we stole the lands from the native people that were here and killed them off. And then on the most productive gross national product that you could create, which at the time was agriculture, we built out agriculture based upon slave labor. Yeah. That is not a pretty picture to paint. That's the reality, right? Mm-hmm. So when having this conversation with some college students last year, and I did the same thing with high school students and college students, said, I want you to contemplate what's the most important thing that you can have right now. Internet access, right? And it's pretty easy to see that internet access, creating phone apps, mobile applications, streaming services is internet and IT development and IT security is clearly the most important thing that we have that's out there right now, right?
Right.
It's the most financially lucrative industry and the most sustainable right now. So let's think in terms of how we would apply those situations today. How successful could we start a business if we just started up an IT company right now? Well, we could do some things, and with talented individuals and the right ideas, we could be successful. Right. How much more successful could we be if I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go into Silicon Valley. I'm going to walk into every single one of the buildings. I'm going to kill the heads of those organizations. And anybody that chooses to stand up and oppose me, I will kill them on sight as well. Or I will tie them to a pole and beat them so that everyone can see them. I will make sure that no one else in this entire building, as talented as they are at writing code and developing code and solving problems on the internet and building infrastructure and systems, all right, I'm going to make sure that every single one of those individuals works for me for absolute freedom. I mean, they work for me for free. I will not provide them their freedom. They will not work 8-hour days. They'll work 16-hour days to get things produced the way that I want to. If they don't, I'll kill their children in front of them. I'll break up their families and send them across the country and around the world. I will make sure that you are going to work as hard as you possibly can for 18 hours a day to make this whole thing go for me. Then, if I am not paying anyone and I haven't paid for the infrastructure that's there, how successful is my business going to be, and how quickly do I get to become a superpower?
Yeah.
Right? That's the reality. That's the reality of the way our country was built. We have to tell that story. And let me tell you, as we talk about this being such a pivot point, an amazing opportunity. This is also an incredibly dangerous opportunity because as so many kids are being kept at home for this semester of school and the last 2 semesters of school and will have spent over a year being educated by their own family, how myopic is that perspective? Because they're not even going to get education from other teachers in the district.
Right.
They're going to get educated at home. So I'm only going to be told mom and dad's perspective on everything.
Right.
I'm only going to be told what mom and dad learned educationally in the 1970s or 80s or 90s or whenever it was, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that can definitely be problematic. You know, it's one thing, you know, for instance, to homeschool, but then kind of branch out their learning. I can say that because I homeschooled all 3 of my children, but we went out into the world too. So we were able to go to other classes and take other courses or commingle with other homeschool families. But the idea of my kids only having my view always, you know, is kind of stunning to think of that, to think that what they know about history isn't something that they also heard from Mrs. Smith, you know, down the road, or the English teacher who they really like, who has sort of been a mentor to them and so on, the way that I learned. And it's just incredible that that's what we're going to be looking at in the next 2-3 years.
And the reality is, you know, if Mrs. Smith is a black woman from the South whose family or she grew up in the Jim Crow era South, she's going to have a completely different perspective on teaching civil disobedience and what's happened historically for us in that space, right?
Yeah.
Versus, you know, I'm a 3 legacy family from Princeton. I went to Princeton, and my dad went to Princeton, and my grandfather went to Princeton. I'm a legacy at Princeton. Well, you got a slightly different perspective on the world,
right?
Right? That's a whole different point of view.
Yep. That's going to be interesting to see what comes out, because we probably won't really see the impact of that, like, seriously for at least 5 years or more.
Well, and we obviously are at a crossroads in that space. We do have a space where we can have individuals who can have a different kind of social awakening that we have going on right now, and that could be one very strong piece of that. And there's also the space of what happens when that social awakening is only reinforced with the family's perspectives.
Particularly depending on the current thinking of that family, whether that be like pro Black Lives Matter or anti social justice. So yeah, it's good. You know, this country at the very least is never a dull moment, right?
It's always the evolution of human spirit and the human character. We'll always get a chance to see how that comes out.
Exactly. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. And I think we've got even little pieces for some other off-topic conversation on the podcast as well, too. So thank you very much for that. Do you have anything that's coming up?
I've got nothing that's really coming up other than the fact that we're going to do a brand new thing over the upcoming weeks of the Men's Exchange. We're going to have people in the community dress a mannequin. So individuals in our community and some of our civic leaders are going to come by the Men's Exchange. They get a chance to use any of the clothing that's inside the Men's Exchange, and they'll dress one of the mannequins. That mannequin will stay in the window, get tagged in their social media. We'll get a chance to see how individuals would, put together fashion sense and style senses. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about a lot of those folks are actually going to be some of the women in our community. And hopefully they can give some of the men in our community some style points and style tips of how they would like to see them dressed.
Right.
So some cool things that we've got going in there. But as of right now, we have events that we do that most of those have, much like the entire world, have been put on pause.
Right.
And we will get those things up and moving again as soon as it becomes safe for us to, or safer for us to be able to congregate together, to fellowship together, to share with one another, to be able to talk and chat and learn from one another in the unique spaces that I sincerely believe can only happen when we are face to face with nonverbal engagement happening as well, and we get a chance to really engage with one another in a personal level.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Oh, I look forward to seeing what the window looks like when I come by. Most of our audience doesn't know this, but I do some of the work at Men's Xchange for the shirts and slacks to be looking so nice, the stuff that isn't sent to the dry cleaners. So I'm really proud of my work with the Men's Xchange.
We're really proud of your work with the Men's Xchange. It's been amazing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what we have, what happens. We've got one of our wonderful community advocates is coming in tomorrow. Lauren Hugg from Hugg Speak Consulting is going to come by tomorrow and dress one of the mannequins. So that should be all over. She is a social media magnet. She's written an amazing book called Digital Kindness that talks about how to actually purport and act when you're in digital spaces and to be kind to one another in all of your social medias. So she is on Twitter and Instagram. Like, we're on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook. She's on all of those mediums as well. It'll be interesting so that we can hopefully, push this out and let everybody see some fun, lighter sides of the universe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so now that we're coming to the end of this podcast, how can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to, obviously if they want to get into a sharp new suit, and also if they want to connect with you personally, how would you like to be contacted?
So obviously if you're looking for clothing, you can come by our shop. It's the Men's Xchange. There's no E in front of Exchange, so it's the Men's Xchange. We're at 409 North Tejon, which is just north of Boulder and Tejon in Colorado Springs, Colorado, downtown. We're there. We're closed on Sundays and Mondays, but we're there Tuesday through Friday from 11 a.m. till 5 p.m. and Saturdays from 11 a.m. till 4 p.m. If there's any changes in that schedule, it is always or almost always reflected on our Google page. So we'd like to make sure we Google. If you need to Google us, you can, and it'll always be updated with our current hours. We are on Pinterest, which is Men's Xchange on Pinterest. If you'd like to follow our boards and our fashion stuff we're doing there. We are on Twitter at the Men's Xchange. We are on Instagram, the Men's Xchange. We are on Facebook. Our business page is the Men's Xchange as well. It's funny that after I do a lot of these different things, I get a bunch of friend requests on my personal Facebook page, and I do not typically accept personal friend requests from individuals that I do not already have a personal relationship with. So certainly connect on any of those other spaces and follow us.
So much, James, for joining me on Laundry and Other Mysteries. It's been a blast. I appreciate your perspective on social justice and civil rights and that whole conversation. I bet you we could probably have another one down the road somewhere, and I bet we will. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, James Proby of the Men's Xchange. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Des.
Today, I have a special request for my listeners. I'd like to encourage you to participate in Random Acts of Kindness Week from February 14th through the 20th. The Laundry Diva and Diva's Laundry Service is working to raise 100 pairs of socks and 25 pairs of sweatpants to donate to UC Health Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. So far, the Men's Xchange has donated a few pairs, but we are still far from our ultimate goal. If you are in Colorado Springs and would like to donate and participate in this random act of kindness, please send me an email to coloradodiva@gmail.com. That's coloradodiva@gmail.com, and let's talk. The sock drive is going until the end of the month of February, so there is still time. In today's episode, James and I discussed how you determine what color socks to wear and how to care for them. I won't rehash the entire conversation except to remind you to 1. Consider tying your socks together or using safety pins to keep them together so you don't lose them in the laundry. 2. Don't ball them up. You'll stretch them out and make them useless. And 3. Have fun with your socks whenever possible. Our current president has shown a penchant for wearing socks that are bold and playful. Personally, I'm a fan of socks that bring joy to the wearer and perhaps the people who may get a peek at them. Life is too short to wear boring socks. If you have a laundry question, comment, or concern, send me a voicemail or drop me an email, and you could be featured on the next episode of Laundry and Other Mysteries. Thank you for listening to Laundry and Other Mysteries. Find us on your favorite podcast app and subscribe wherever you're listening to this episode. I'd like to send a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Thanks for your support, guys. And if you would like to support this podcast and become a regular patron, visit us on patreon.com/Divas Laundry Service. For $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive naked and ad-free content and get a special shout out on a future episode. Special thanks to CJ Hackett and A Bad Night for a Hero for their song Carnival Ride. Check out the link in the show notes to all their indie music. In the meantime, be on the lookout for another episode of Laundry and Other Mysteries. But while you're waiting, do me a favor. Keep the suds at bay and put those clothes away.